evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Hi. Yes. Okay, so conversation. This is the conversation part of the evening. Thank you so much for coming to join us and being part of our chat today. So I think for the last 3 days, 3 nights certainly, we have been in the Böll in the mountains. And because of the weather, just consistently inhaling carbon monoxide because we were sitting in front of a fire. All right, it was so cold, we had to sit in front of a fire for most of our time together. Yeah. And as one imagines what happens in front of a fire, it gave birth to incredible conversation, vulnerability, and just connection. And so we thought we would try and recreate that experience here with you. So we're still trying to figure out whether you are with us in the fire, whether you are the fire. we haven't quite established that. But tonight's session is unmoderated. It's really going to flow organically as we chat about both this poetry retreat that we've been part of, our experience with collaboration, contemporary issues, and so on, and whatever really comes up. Yeah. And we'll obviously share some poetry, because I believe we've been billed as poets. It feels appropriate to share poetry? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll just start with a round of introductions and then kick off our conversation, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to know you afterwards. Just as a quick heads up, some of the poets do have books and publications, so please check how you can support them after this. All right. So my name is Sipokazi Jonas. I know this is a big surprise. Hold on. I'm a poet. And I'm a theater maker. I'm a filmmaker based here in Cape Town. And you'll get to know us a little bit more in this conversation.
Good evening. My name is Zita Maketa. I'm a Pretoria-based writer. And yeah, I'm here and I'm looking forward to enjoying this session with you all.
And my name is Burcu Şahin. I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden, where I was born and grew up. My heritage is Turkish. I work as a creative writing teacher. I write poetry mostly, but also literary criticism and other types of essays, I guess. And I was invited here by Hear My Voice, which I'm incredibly grateful and happy for.
My name is Lisette Maneza. I am, first of all, also so grateful for the experiences that Hear My Voice has been gifting us with, but also very excited to be with these gifted poets and to meet them as people before meeting their poems, which has been great. And I am based in Belgium, in Brussels. And I am from the Netherlands, from Rwanda, something like that. Yeah.
So by the way, Hear My Voice is a poetry organization that's also based in Pretoria, and they do incredible work to support the development of our work here and all around the world. So they were very kind to select us for a poetry retreat. As I said, then they took us into the mountains, where unfortunately load shedding did reach. You would think not, but it was there. Yeah. You know.
Well, and I also think that it is also important to highlight the fact that we come from different backgrounds as writers, different experiences also, and I think it's also quite important, to give thanks to Hear My Voice, so that for us to be able to come to such spaces, engage, interact. I think it's very important, and I think it should continue. It's been running. I hope it gets the support, the funding to do it. But yeah, incredible organization that's really pushing us out. Yeah. Yeah, thank
you. Maybe we can just start with the place that we were. I just want to say something about that, since it's my first time in South Africa. Maybe you would expect that I would, speak about the culture or the people, but I've mostly been in the nature or the countryside. And where we were now, we also spent some time by the river that was just by the house where we were staying. And I feel like that also sparked a lot of conversation about, you know, nature, spirituality, heritage, history. And, you know, I grew up in like these identical concrete blocks just after one another, and my access to that type of recreation or those spaces have been very limited. So maybe I just want to ask you, what importance or place does such spaces have for you? Or maybe also when it came to us connecting with each other. What are your ideas?
Well, I think environment plays a very huge role. You know, the space that we're in, it allowed us to be actually interact deeply. You know, because we had nothing. Load shedding was there, so the only thing that we had was mostly us. You know, so we had to communicate more. We had to tell our stories about the stuff that we encounter. You know, so environment plays a role in that sense for me, because also if you look at it. We grew up in walls, you know, surrounded by walls, tall buildings and all that, you know. So we hardly interact with nature. And it's very fascinating to be in a natural space. I mean, the sound of water, the sound of the birds, the air itself, you know. So to engage with that, it sort of like allows you to draw deep into yourself, especially the peace, you know, the quietness. You are sort of like forced or pushed to be quiet into yourself, you know, and listen more into yourself. So I think the space plays a very huge role, you know. I think that's one thing that I picked from being in this retreat, you know, that environment in itself allows you to look at yourself differently, you know. I mean, I interact differently with the city, and now I know I interact differently with the bush, if I can call it that, you know. So yeah, it allows one to interact with himself deeply, I think, yeah.
I think my experience had to do with why I even signed up to be part of the retreat, because and this is a conversation that came up around attitudes towards the writing process or writing practice, because I have been spending time mostly isolated this year, intentionally. It wasn't like I was abandoned. I chose to spend time alone, and as a performing artist, a lot of my time is spent with people and constantly sort of expanding my energy outward. And so I took a decision this year to take a break from public performances. This is actually, being at the festival is my second this year. But it was interesting because at some point it became too isolating. And I think when you think about writing, which is a modernist thing, that the novel became an opportunity for, you know, the hallowed writer to sit in front of a fire and, you know, read, both for writer and reader, that the reader would sit, you know. But really, I was reminded of how communal writing is.
True.
Because where I was trying to wrestle with certain things on my own, when we got together, and especially in nature, it was actually the conversations.
Yeah.
It was being able to observe certain things. I'm sure a lot of our writing that happened this week, and I'm sure for a while to come, the 6 of us that were there were 6 of us, is probably going to hold the elements of what we experienced. So water, cold, fire, rocks, mountains, you know, did I mention cold?
Maybe some leopards we didn't see.
Yes, leopards. We saw signs of, but not signs of. You get what I'm saying? Okay. So all of those things, I think, are making their way, or they will certainly bleed into my writing because of the experience. But it was interesting how conversation sparked certain things and then could then become the seed of creation. So it was an important reminder of the communal aspect of creation. And something that came up as well was how even the history of praise poetry within our cultures is again, there's something communal. Yes, it is about archiving history. It is about the voice of the people back to the king. But it informs even how we think of the role of poetry or art really in society. So what was also wonderful, and this was just on a personal note, was, and I made mention of this while we were huffing and puffing and sweating, that there was no real sign of people through pollution. There was no pollution, which was wonderful to see. But obviously there were signs of humanity because the road had been created, and clearly they'd broken and repurposed the rocks to become a pathway. So there's this almost, and then there were other signs. You know, we had the cement, the dam, and there was like a random brick wall in the water, and we're like, what happened here? So this juxtaposition between the isolation of nature, but clearly some of it is curated, like there is a human presence. And I think those contradictions are really wonderful to then process and think about for this time that we live in, where we seem adamant to destroy the planet.
Yeah, and I think that the deep conversations were sparked by this lack of distractions. Like when you're home or when you're in the middle of the city, there's so much. And I think that for us, there was nowhere to go or to wander to. So we went inside. And even when we were together, we had those conversations from within to the others. But it's sparking a question within me of as writers, as poets. For myself, I live in Brussels, in a city not as crazy as Johannesburg or Cape Town, but there's a lot going on, and there's people everywhere, and things are happening, and it inspires me. So most of my poems, I write them in Brussels, yet having these retreats or hiking, staying in the middle of nature, inspired me to isolate myself. What is it for you? Isolation or distraction or or something else?
I don't know. Like I think I would be a bad writer if I was isolated. I think listening to myself, it's fine. But then
But that's the myth, though. Like, the myth is, you know, the poet is like this, you know, crazy artist, prophet that is kind of an outcast, that is not really intermingling with other people, but still somehow, as in the tradition of praise poetry, speaking for the people or speaking for the people that cannot speak, you know?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly what I was going to say. For me, it's good to be isolated, but I don't think I would want to be isolated forever. You know, I think as a writer, I connect more with stories that are around me. You know, I draw more from what's happening around me. So now if I'm in a space where it's quiet, it's remote, it's in the mountains, I can write, you know, but I don't think I would actually enjoy, you know, and not that I don't like being in solitary, you know, I enjoy that. But then I just think that for story's sake, I feel that I need to be in the presence of other people. I need to be in the city, so that now I can actually have more to interact with, more to draw from, you know. So for me, I think I wouldn't really stay that long in the bush, you know. I'm a city guy. I'm a city guy, and I think my story is also from the city. I mean, I'm a writer because I'm from here, the city itself, you know. So I think I connected more with writing, being in this environment, you know. So now, if I'm gonna shift myself from this space, it's gonna be a challenge, and which I think I would appreciate, but definitely wouldn't want to be isolated forever. No. I wouldn't want to be in the bush for a long time.
But I actually want to use this opportunity to segue into a poem.
Okay,
Oh,
good.
yeah. That's nice.
No, it's not my book. Oh!
They want a certain poem, I think.
No, she's asking if it's my book. No. You'll know when it comes.
Trigger warning.
By the way, Uzuzi Popam has a book, so is it here? Please do buy. I'll market people. Don't worry about it. And it's her birthday! Yay! So we are poets, not musicians. You're not gonna get a song. Sorry, right? Am I wrong? Oh well, you're a
But
musician.
Lisette can sing,
You're a
though.
musician.
So I feel like...
So, because for me, it's about movement, and I think if we think about history, I come from a peri-urban area, Ekomani, Queenstown. So it's a small town. It's neither city nor rural, but it's influenced by both. And so when I say I go home, this is also an interesting thing. And people like you guys saw I was dropped. Like I live here. I've been in Cape Town for 20 years, but home is in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah.
It's where my parents are, but there's even a further home. When they speak about your umbilical cord, that's where it's buried. That's home. So that's a whole. So when I move between the rural in visiting where my mom comes from, but then home is where they are in Queenstown, which is a peri-urban area, and I live in a city. So with all that flux, I think for me it's in constant movement. But another side of whether it's an isolated process or a communal process is really collaboration. And that's where I'm going with this poem. I have the opportunity to work with different artists, as we all do, different forms as well. And this poem was for an exhibition by an architect, right, at the Serpentine Pavilion, Kensington Gardens in, I don't know, it's in London, yeah, or close by, I don't know. I've never been, but they asked me to write about it. I was like, sure. But collaboration for me is another way of writing. It's another way of being and creating that actually removes, for me, the writer as the center. And it becomes again the community and thinking about serving the work. So this was about home and migration. So it was a Muslim architect from South Africa who lives in Joburg, was creating an exhibition in London and was thinking about all this isolated areas with the city and which histories were moving and et cetera, ne? So this is the poem that was written for this collaboration, is where I'm going with it. It's called Home, Recipes, Appetizers and Snacks, Samosas. Haram masala seasons the air and summons us from every room in the house into the kitchen door. An adhan, calling us to ritual in fragrant song. We congregate around my grandmother's table like cumin, coriander, and bruised bay leaves. The mortar and pestle of her voice can grind truth out of a reluctant mouth. We are converted in this gathering. Black cardamom seeds broken open by the press of laughter. Aunts, mothers, and daughters who smell of smoke and ghee. Grandmother hums in arthritis, hollows out the slopes of all-purpose flour, then invites us to fill it with confession. Bring the flour to the water, she says. This is how she taught us to make pastry, by quenching the flour and salt with water. To knead is to pray with both hands, knuckle kneading in the dough. I watch these older women subdue their wounds with a rolling pin, wounds that do not translate into the new language when crossing seas into new countries. They repurpose strips of dough into bandages and seal the evidence with paste. Grandmother folds the strips into triangles. She passes the soft pyramid to me like an heirloom and finds me patient with spoonfuls of mashed potatoes and peas. Between the two of us, the body of a samosa takes its shape. This is how we have cooked for generations. This is also how I stuff my accent and my skin inside my best English. A lunchbox that breathes masala into closed spaces. I have learned not to stomach our food in public. To do so is to air the pungent history which follows me out of the womb, through the kitchen door, into a world where my vernacular is suspicious. It smells like another country, they say. Makes them ask where my family comes from originally. Force me to search further back when I answer, here. A world that insults me by names which my mother and father did not dish out for me at birth. I want to unpack what fills my pockets, the burden I cannot put anywhere else but between my grandmother's knuckles inflamed with prayer. I want to migrate this table, the chutney of voices and seething oil beyond the borders of our front gate into the street. I want the women in my family who followed their husbands to other countries to eat samosas in public, and making the crisp of gold-brown skin blistered by heat with their teeth, to expose the entrails and tell their own fortune, to negotiate the names which they brought and the names which they cook for themselves. I want us to improvise what no longer serves us in this recipe, to guess at the size of a pinch, the depth of deep fried, the length of a strip. Home will take its shape from how we knead English with our tongues, or not. Masala will linger in the streets, on our fingers, in our breath.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
Oh, what a
wanted
poem.
to I wanted to say something about how when we're speaking about loneliness and community, how my experience with poetry, having a family that's scattered over the world, is that in poetry you can create that space where everyone gets to come together and you get to speak to those people in one room, you know? And I felt like your poem was also about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what's also interesting for me is, and I'm hoping someone has a poem that could speak to this, is this, again, the collaboration was also in thinking about her culture and her history and where the intersections are with my own. Because we have different cuisine, right? So there was a journey for me in learning about this. We had hoped that I would actually go and learn how to make samosas at her grandmother's place, but we couldn't make it happen. But is there any way, you know, you find, whether it's from being here in South Africa, whether it's, you know, all of your movements within the country, that you find connections, whether it's the work itself that's connected you to other experiences, but where there's just those streams of connection in the same way that, you know how we saw that river flow?
Yeah.
You know, how has that flown for you?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure because I'm still trying to pin it down. But then the reality is that part of my family is in Limpopo. And I moved between Pretoria and Limpopo, right? So I guess to draw from, like we were saying earlier about movement, you know, it is very much important, like going back to isolation also, it is very much important that even when we want to be in spaces where we can actually be within ourselves and be within our thoughts and our feelings, it is very much important also to allow ourselves to actually be out, you know, because now when you are out, it means you are traveling, right? It means you are in the world, you know, you are present in the world. So now, that's where now the connections, especially stories that people tell, because that's where I connect more, you know, I connect more with stories that linger between people that I know, and obviously maybe even people that I don't know. But then for somehow, you would find that, especially now between my movements between these two provinces, which is Gauteng and Limpopo, you would find that now when I'm in Pretoria, it's more, I'm in the city, right? So it's more my space, you know, it's more, I'm comfortable with what's going on and all that. But then the minute I start moving, now I internalize the movement. I internalize myself more. Now, that's where I start to internalize myself so that I can draw from outside, you know, so I observe more. You know, I look at people's faces, you know, because that's where the stories are. So I tune into the stories that I'm maybe about to encounter, you know. So that's where for me the connection is that from here, I know the stories that are here in Pretoria. I know my story here, you know. But then the minute I start migrating, it's like you are entering a space that you are not really used to. And now going to Limpopo also is another thing because culture differences. In a sense that I'm in the village now. So in the village, things are done differently. You know, like example, when there's funerals, it's different when I'm in Pretoria in the city. You know, you have to wear a jacket that side every flipping time. But in the city, you don't have to. You can be you. You know what I mean? So to adjust to such spaces, you know, I think that's where, for me, and also drawing it back to where I stay, you know, because now when I move to Limpopo, obviously I pick stuff up there, and then I have to come back home. So now the journey back home, I think that's where now for me the connection is. I'm connecting stories, you know. I'm sort of like connecting the two worlds. So from that side, I would bring back whatever that I picked up from that side to Pretoria and start evaluating, because I think also the village has taught me to respect time. I think when you are in the rurals, time seems to move slow. You know, like things are a little bit slower, you know. So when I move to Pretoria, I remind myself of, oh no, actually I don't have to be in the rush, you know. I can actually just chill a little bit and take things as they come, you know. So I think those, for me, the two worlds, that's where I pick up most of my connections. Well, I do travel around the country, Lesotho and all that, but then I think for me, that's where traveling far distances, like as in far distances. It's more exciting than actually observing. You know, it's more, I look forward to whatever that I'm gonna be getting there. You know, not necessarily that I'm looking for something, but whatever it is that I'm gonna get there, I'm open to it, you know. So I travel a lot like that, and also I think bringing it back home, you know, that's for me is very much important, that you can be everywhere, you can connect with everyone wherever you are, but then to bring it back home so that it makes sense to you, it somehow makes sense to your people as well, you know. So I think that's the connection that I'm talking about here, yeah.
I think for me to think about this question of connecting, what I thought of first is that in my stories I tend to search for the past and the present and what will come, the people before us and the people after us, something like that. And I think, as you said, like what was a moment like that or something like that here in South Africa, is that while we were hiking in the cradle of
Together
you,
or on your own?
It was
a
a
story there.
collaboration.
Isolation.
toge-
Sorry, I'm so sorry. You had an inside joke. That's rude.
Yeah. You're the fire.
Yeah.
whatever.
When we were hiking
when
in
we
the
were
cradle of
hiking,
humankind.
yeah. And we were with you, me, and the person that was
Guiding us.
yeah. And we were having a conversation. And I feel like when I'm here or anywhere on the African continent, and I'm like, and someone comes to me and asks, "Where are you from?" They don't want to hear in the Netherlands, Belgium, anything like that. It's like, you look East African. Tell me. And then I'm like, yeah, Rwanda, and I have two responses. The one is like, "Oh wow, you're president." And the other one is like, "Oh shit, 1994. So we were having a conversation about Rwanda, something like that, and the person guiding us said something like, "Yeah, I would like to go there. What is it like there, etc., etc." And I said positive things, and then I said, "But the past is present." And before that, we had already talked about. I'm not sure, but. Maybe we had already talked about the South African history a bit, but his response to me was like, "Oh yeah, just like here." And then when I talk about 1994, I think of genocide. Even when I do shows, I ask my musicians to play 1994, and it's this that comes out. But when you say 1994 here. That's another story.
Yeah.
So I feel like within that, like simultaneously, in 1994, things were happening here, things were happening there. They are not connected, but they are, something like that. So I feel like it led into a poem, actually, but a lot of thoughts as well. Being here, I've been feeling very blessed and amazing, and at the same time very upset with like, what happened here? And then growing up Dutch, and then finding fragments of the Netherlands in the south of Africa is just what is happening? What happened? So yeah, in that I think. I think that if I write something when I come back home, even if I will be writing it by myself, it will be, I don't know, a response at least. Yeah.
You have a poem you can share now?
If I have a poem.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't, okay. It might be long. We will see how it goes, and if I go till the end. hear my voice. Hear my voice. For here's my voice, here's my voice. Here's the thing with speaking. When I break my silence, it breaks me. So killing this poem may kill me. A poem can tear its own poets apart. Hear my voice. Here's a song. Here's a song and here's my voice. You may slam and I shall praise, and you praise my pain. When I'm on stage, I shall speak and you may hear. Hear my voice. Here's a poem with reason, writing our cohesion. Here's my voice, my meaning. Here's my hurt finally healing. A burning, revealing, a pain, a past, a present, peeling. A slaughter we've been seeing, a daughter freeing. Here's the truth about seeking truth. You may burn before you reach the sun. These are the dangers of telling. Breaking the silence breaks me. Killing this poem, it kills me. I've learned a lot here. I've learned what a joy it is to be alive. What a gift it is to meet God's people. I've learned. In Johannesburg, I've learned how misery increases crimes. And the best is present. I've learned that forgiving you will come with time, but forgiving me will take forever. I've learned if I kill this poem, it may kill me, and when I break the silence, it may break me. I've learned. I know another story like that. I know another story like that. He tells me a story, and I know another story like that. I know another story like that. I've seen it in my mother's eyes. How the genocide still lives inside us. Are you Hutu or are you Tutsi? I know another story like that. Are you colored or are you black? I know another story like that. How the past. I know another story like that. I know another story like that. How the past is present. I know it from within. Telling myself his abuse is not my seed. Oh, anger makes you burn, but resentment makes you die. Forgiving gives you back some kind of power. Perhaps forgiving you will come with time, but forgiving myself will take forever. I know another story like that. I've seen it in my brother's eyes.
Oh my gosh.
How he used his weakness as his weapon. Oh, I've seen it in my brother's eyes. How the past is present. These stories I know, creeping into our poems, creeping into this fire, creeping into our prayers, creeping into this weeping, creeping into this speaking, creeping into this deepening, creeping into ourselves, creeping into our futures, creeping into our futures, creeping into our voices, creeping into here. Hear my voice, oh here's my voice. Here's the thing with speaking. When I break my silence, it may break me. So killing this poem, it may kill me. Thank you.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. I should be leaving, man. Like, what? Yeah.
Now it's your turn.
Man, thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a wonderful piece, bro. Like, I enjoyed that. But anyway, going back to the... you know,
I loved how you had a microphone, you know, because I was doing my poem and then
yeah, well, I mean, it hits hard. You know, there's some nice poems there.
Thank you.
I wanted us to talk about collaboration, like you were saying earlier. What does that really mean in this contemporary time, you know? And how do you, as an individual artist, how do you engage, you know? How do you, let me start with you. How do you allow yourself, yeah, that's the right, how do you allow yourself to open your art up for a communion? You know what I mean? So how do you do that?
Before I answer that question, I just want to invite you to collaborate with us by buying tickets to our show tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So you can get, thank you. So you can get more of all of this. There's actually 6 of us, 6:30 to 7:30, I believe, in the Star Theatre. So, pardon? Bodies Under Siege, thank you. That's Bodies Under Siege. Yeah. Ne? So when we see you, we'll be like, collaborator, you're here. Almost lost track of the question. So how do I open myself up? Yeah. I am an avid collaborator, and I've worked with filmmakers, I've worked with visual artists, I've worked with definitely musicians, probably more than anyone. So girl. Well, you know, I make theater. Recently, I think last year, I collaborated with a choreographer who was staging a production in Leeds and London, and then asked me to write a poem that would be part of this ballet production and choreographed to the poem. I collaborate with my mother because I am a product of a democratic South Africa, and I was born in '86, so state of emergency, and then very early years of South Africa, born through the transition, which means, you know, we're like, okay, what's the compromise here? Things are changing. Okay, let's put the black kids in the white schools, and then you suffer your way through culturally and linguistically. That's how I'm seeing it. But so anyway, the impact of that was then, obviously my formative years, I ended up in this loss between speaking is Xhosa at home, and then I went to an Afrikaans school and I went to an English school. And in those schools, you're not allowed to speak your mother tongue on campus. And my parents, yeah. So, and even I remember when there was the hair protest, I was like, oh, wow, we went through that, like in the 90s. So what that means is I've lost, or I've never had the opportunity to develop full proficiency in my mother tongue. Yeah. And even though I would consider myself more proficient in English, culturally, there's no connection. So the in-betweenness, the lostness, learning to be a hybrid, what that means is when I write in my mother tongue, I have to connect with my mother. I have to collaborate. When I write Xhosa poems, I call my mother and ask her what this word is for this, what this means. Sometimes I have to Google idioms. You know, it's like, it's quite painful. It is. But I've gotten to a place where that is something too real. Was that too real? It is, yeah, ne? So, but it's also become a thing of, you know, like a mosaic, just restoring some pieces of what my tongue is, you know? And I'm finding pride in writing in Xhosa poorly, but I'm doing it. Like there's a becoming I'm going through by doing. And so it's also created a beautiful relationship with my mom, even in that, where I can ask. Yeah. I know that if I don't know, my mother does. Sure. So I consider my mom one of my main collaborators. So being that, I mentioned this in our chat, it's so humbling because you can't be precious. Can't be like, here's this beautifully, perfectly formed poem. Now work your way around it. You cannot. Sure. You will be broken. The work will be broken. You have to. So it's always great actually to start from scratch, where we all just create together. Yeah. You know, because instead of trying to bring something that's pre-existing. So I find it to be a constant death of the ego when it comes to collaboration, if we want to serve the work.
Yeah, especially with your mother. I have the same experience.
Thankfully, she's the authority, so I'm
Yeah.
like, thanks, Mom. I'm there. I don't pay her anything, you know. She gets the pleasure of being my mother. But yeah, I mean, it feels like, you know, there's in isiXhosa, when someone speaks a language really well, sithi uyincancela ebeleni. They've suckled it from their mother's breast. And so I feel like every time I do that, I'm giving an opportunity for nourishment. You know?
That's beautiful. And I can relate to that as well. And I mean, there are so many connections, thinking of the question you asked earlier. But I've written 2 poetry collections so far. And the first one I really consider as a book of translation, really. Because the poems are centered around my mother and my grandmother and the stories that they've been telling me, but that is obviously in Turkish, and I write in Swedish. And I would maybe consider, like, home is a complicated place for me because Sweden, you know, being rejected as, you know, the idea what the citizen is or what that looks like, and then Turkey, that is also quite a brutal nation against minorities and whatnot. So I think that, you know, that idea of origin is something that's really been important for me in my poetry, and going back to my mother or my grandmothers has been one way, and through their language to explore that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me read the first poem in that book. So I'm going to read in English. It's translated by Jennifer Hayashida. You dreamed the law was on our side. Songs of praise were sung in our names. Silent graves cautioned you against decayed faces and disguised corpses. You dreamed we were someplace else, by a beach where the seashells were not cracked, where grandmother did not pick shells before our return, where sand gleamed beneath the sun. In our house, the table was set just as you left it. We understood ambition. We understood loyalty. When the dogs drank from their bowls, we gave them the last of the bread. When neighbors came for the evening's final cup of tea, we said, "No mothers cry here anymore."
Oh, man. What are these ladies doing, man? Yo, these ladies are killing me.
Show us what you do.
Oh, my gosh. Thank you so much for that piece. Oh, my God. Is my turn?
Can I ask a question before that? Or do you have something in mind?
No. You can
No?
ask a question. Go ahead.
What you were saying before doing this poem about translating, like it's a work of translating because the stories are in Turkish, but you put them in Swedish. I read something about it of like this author writing, she was an author and a translator. She wrote this thing called Translating Myself and Others. And when I read about that, I felt like, oh, that's what I do. Something like that. And I'm just connecting questions to each other. There was this question of collaborating or making your poems communal, opening up, etc. So I have had moments where I had big slams going on, and my whole family was like, "Oh, let's go support her," and I was terrified. Because they were gonna hear my poems in which I translate everything that happened in our households.
Like, sorry, Mom, I became a writer.
you know, like all of a sudden, yeah, the things we do not speak about were on stage. So my question is like, how has that experience been for you, or is it an experience like that? Yeah.
I just want to say something like about family as well. That, you know, I was talking about, you know, origin stories and first families, but I think that for me, those communities that I have found, and especially the queer community, where a lot of people are being ostracized or not having a relation to that first family, creating new family structures is also important. Like, it can also be outside of the queer community, but just thinking of family and care in a different way has really, I've also written together with other people in that kind of context as a collective. And it was before I was even published myself. So that has been extremely formative and also just important for me as a human being. Yeah.
Oh, weird. Oof. Well, I don't know. Like, can I read a poem also? I mean,
Yeah, just read the damn poem.
let me just read a poem. And also, I think it's not the poem that I wanted to read. You know, today in the morning I got a call. So there's collaboration going on. So there's this other friend of mine that we're working with. She's an illustrator. So now we're discussing this poem, because now I had to send her something so that she can start working, you know? So I sent her this poem, and then we were discussing it a little bit. So it never left me since morning, you know? So I had to share this. It's titled Laughing in the Syntax of Death. Laughing in the syntax of death, time walks us backwards to dug out graves, our wombs. Flesh becomes friends with worms. Tombstones spell us back to dust. There is a storm gathering inside these bones. They bust a skeleton laugh. The dying are a river that breaks into streams. They flood graveyards. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's time to like start wrapping our conversation up, and maybe if there is a question or two, we can do that as well. We do have some time. Yes, bring out the pencil and the notepad, everyone.
Your poem made me think of something I read on your Instagram.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like life made it, like we were drunk on life. What was it?
Oh, while we were drunk on life, death sobered us.
Guys.
That's a little collaboration right there.
Okay, I have one last question, because I feel like maybe we've been talking about it indirectly, but it seems like when it comes to poetry, I think I said this also during our conversations when we were at the retreat, but that poetry, as I see it, can be a way to express what you would not be able to express anywhere else or to anyone else. And there is a lot of pain in that. But where do you find the openings? Because I feel like when we talk about
You mean
community,
lightness or
when we talk about community, there can be pain in community as well, but there can also be joy and, you know, feeling like you're a part of something bigger. So where does that happen in writing? Do you understand the
For
question?
me, to be honest, I think you asked this question before as well.
Okay.
But I also want to know what you actually say. But for me, I would say that the translating is for me a huge release. Or listening to a poem of yours and knowing that something that I've only seen or I've only felt or I only kind of knew, like, how do you call it? yeah, unconscious knowing or something like that. When something like that has been translated for me, it makes it lighter. So there, first of all, for me. Well, I'm curious.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm not sure if I got the question. My head was all over, you know, like, you know, when you are in, yeah, like I was thinking a whole lot of stuff. So I didn't get the question. So if you can repeat that for me.
Let's just forget the question and let them ask the question.
Okay.
Should
We
we?
got time. We got
If
time.
we can, yeah, if they do.
Well, I mean, to.
Yeah, we have a question here.
I'm gonna say words, and then if there's a question in the words, please feel free to answer.
We will try.
All right. So I'm thinking about like the privilege of writing about nature, right? And like having been able to access like nature, and how like, you know, like with the romanticism, like white men would write pretty poems about flowers, right? And Zita said something about the story, like the stories being in the city, and so how then do, you know, marginalized people start writing about nature from a place of joy, because they're quite often busy writing poems about life as it happens around them, right? Keeping in mind also like creation myths, and like, so especially like from an African context, because creation myths are so based in nature, right? People looked to the sky and wondered, and then like created stories about how this world was made. So, you know, how do we then maybe start creating our own creation myths, especially like with the with like English language, like the stories are Turkish but they're written in Swedish. So like how
Well,
Ooh, yeah, no, that's, yeah, yo. Yeah, well, I think it's very important. Like the question that you're raising, how do we write our own myths? You know, what's stopping us from doing that? I mean, I think nothing is really doing it. You know, nothing is really stopping us from looking at nature like old people did. You know, looking at nature and writing from a perspective of not necessarily. How do I put this? We write from a view of what we have, what we are exposed to, you know. So now, if I'm in a natural setting, like in the mountains and all that, I'm exposed to the rocks, you know. I'm exposed to the rivers. I'm exposed to that. Now, the only thing maybe that I can think of now is that how do I interpret the language that's between me and that space? You know, how do I draw poems from that? You know, because obviously there has to be a story. There has to be a story. But how do I source it out? You know, so I think it's very much important. And I think maybe to source that out also, it sort of like puts you in a position where you have to be in tune with yourself. You have to be in yourself so that you can actually feel the environment. You know, so it sort of like pulls me back to that position of saying, it all sort of like resonates within, you know. Even the rocks, the language of the rocks is within, you know. We are the rocks type thing, you know. That's, I think being in that space, it sort of like allows you to understand that, you know, or you are part of this thing, so you can never separate yourself. So you have to stay in tune and tell what comes from that space, as opposed to being in the city where we can actually just drop a poem anywhere, you know, because there's just a whole lot of stuff happening, you know. I can pick a poem from a street corner, you know, from an office block or whatever. So I think for me, writing, being in nature and writing from that space, it has more to do with self, like any other environment. But I think for you to be able to interpret the stories that are in that environment, you have to draw it back in within, you know what I mean? But there are stories anyway, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Xabiso uyasokolisa, man.
Eish.
No, because, I mean, this is a question that has very little to do with poetry, like with writing, because I think if marginalized people are going to see nature and write pretty things, then you must first improve their lives, right? Because we're all going to see a rock, one will see a weapon, one will see a pillow, right? Based on the life that they're living. So I would think there are maybe, so the big one is like,
Yeah.
you know, Parliament is down here. You ask them to fix our lives, and then we get the poems. But I think the second would be time. You know, I think of a retreat situation like this where we were there for 3-4 days, you'd need 6 months
Yeah.
to go through the healing. Like, or at least to kind of catalyze something, because even 6 months is not enough. In fact, a lifetime is not enough to heal. But I think time and removal from that context can do something, right? Because you can, there's an unearthing that happens. I mean, I've spoken to drama practitioners who speak about how their students, when it comes to, they're given, hey, come up with a play. It's always about violence in South Africa. Like from primary, high school, university, because those are the lives that they've been living, and there's a desperation for reflection to actually say, this is my voice and this is what I can share. So you would need time to kind of process and work through that. So it's a very difficult question. Thank you. And then I think with mythology, I think that is accessible to us. We'd obviously have to change the framework, but I've been returning to Insomi to find language for mythology. And I think there's something about children's stories, Insomi, other kind of folklore is where it's at. I think borrowing from that, seeing, because for me, I realized I have to first change my entire frame of reference of how the world works. Which is why when I went back, I was like, man, Igongongo wasn't such a bad guy. Like, you know, I think I get him. I think the Igongongo is a cannibal character. In Xhosa folklore. Does it sound bad? But yeah, so there's one of the villains is a cannibal, but the cannibaling is not really the most interesting thing about him. But yeah, so anyway, going back and seeing the world from that perspective that I grew up with is kind of helping me slowly to then create my own myths. But that I found that's where I need to go in order to think about that. But yeah, it's hard, and also to see writing about pretty flowers as not being a denial of politics, right?
Yeah,
of one's personal
I
politics
wanted to
be
I wanted to
valuable.
come in there because I actually did write nature poems, but they were in the context of colonization and how botany and zoology has a direct link to race biology and the colonization project. So showing that nature is not neutral, even if it is shown in those types of poetry, you know, that nature is in fact already politicized and exploited, just as people are.
Can I say though, I really do wish for us to experience the neutrality of nature.
Yeah,
Like
the
for us to
pleasure.
have that luxury of
Just being there.
Yeah, but it's, you know, you have a different relation to
Absolutely.
it when you are already ascribed to being the wild or being that which is to
Right,
be exploited.
even where we were like, how did this house get here? Whose name is on the walls?
Yeah, and those
Right?
graves that we saw, like there was some history there, definitely. So
Also, if you want to know more of what we're talking about, you should definitely apply for the retreat next year.
yeah. And with that said, do you want to say some last words? I think there's.
Oh, there's a question.
Okay, let's
Okay,
go.
okay. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Time. Sorry.
Sorry.
I will.
Yes, reply and then.
Can you hear me?
Ah, okay.
Yes. Okay. First of all, thank you so much. My heart is beating really fast. My body's tingling. I've had an adrenaline rush all morning, all day, and I feel extremely overstimulated. And I want to know from you guys, like when you moved, specifically with the retreat, right? Like you think, I'm going on a retreat, I'm gonna, be one with nature, wusa, and all of that, right? But then when you get there, there's just so much inspiration, right? And like that juxtaposition of there's so much that you're seeing and you're so inspired by it. And then there's the noise that's coming, from within. Like, so how are you working through that? Like, of just like silencing the noise that you come from into the space of the retreat, and then silencing the noise within
so that you can take in what's now been silenced in the space that you're in. And I asked this specifically from the physical, from the body, and how you experienced that. Yeah.
I have two short things, and then maybe
Maybe
Lisette.
just you is fine, just because we've missed our time.
Yeah, it's just for me journaling and then grounding. So breath work or some type of exercise or something that will like get you back into your body is my go-to.
I have a very bad answer. But the load shedding has been humbling. It's not to joke about it as we did by the fire, but I feel like those 4 hours of like, okay, no connection, nothing, like it already cuts a lot of noise out. Yeah, just that to keep it brief. Yeah.
I think if anyone is ever planning a retreat, so there were also hot tubs and
There's
and
hikes,
no network, so that helped. But I think the key thing was it was a very organic setup, so there was no pressure. We weren't trying to like constantly achieve, okay, now do this, now do this. So there was a flow. Everyone had their own flow within the space, and I think the approach of being, you could leave there without having written anything. So that wasn't really the. Yeah, I think all of us.
Yeah, not
fragment
being
here and there.
productive.
So
since
exactly, it
that
wasn't
is-
about being productive. It was about retreating. So I think
Yeah.
one's own practice around that.
And thinking about writing and talking about writing. No. I mean, I mean like by talking about it, like just unwrapping what writing is for us. I feel like. Yeah.
Well, I think also just to wrap it up, I think it's, for me, getting there, I think the hike that we took sort of like settled me in. You know, I was tired coming back, definitely exhausted. Yeah, right? So the 6 kilometers killed me, right? But but I was like, after the shower, after relaxation, I felt like connected to the environment. Because now we were at the river, and then obviously there's mountains around, you know. So now, I think after the whole thing, because I was not feeling well, you know. I can't really say I was settled. I was not really feeling physically well, right? And then I think after the hike, that's when now my body started like connecting to the environment. And then coming back, I was exhausted. I took a shower proper, and then I started feeling more connected to nature, you know. So the intensity that you're talking about, I relate. You know, I connect with the question that you are saying, in a sense that a new space can be very exhausting, you know, because there's a lot going in your head of where you are going, what you're gonna be doing there, and then when you get there, the actual environment itself, you know, it's sort of like also, you know, pushes you around. So yeah, I think physically for me, it was more of just taking that hike and coming back and feeling a little bit connected to the environment. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for listening.
We'll see you at the bookshop when you buy people's books, and tomorrow at our show.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.